Hello and welcome to Talking Shit About. I'm Elizabeth, your host, and each month I bring on a guest to talk about something they love, something they hate, and hopefully by the end we've all learned something. This show is usually pretty lighthearted. Sometimes we cover serious topics, sometimes not so serious topics. There's a little bit of educational content sprinkled in there somewhere, but mostly we're just here to have fun, learn, and grow as people, and hopefully be entertained. That's really the main point of a podcast, I guess. Except for education. I don't know. Just, I hope you have fun. I hope you have a good time. With that, let's just go ahead and talk some shit.
I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I have friends that are firefighters and I know that they use soap.
And she was screaming at me over soup.
Fuck this, I am not ever talking to a Scientologist again. These people are all insane.
I'm putting my bricks in the dumpsters, motherfuckers. Do you see me, bitches? I'm throwing my bricks. And he's just like chucking bricks.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Shit About. I'm here today with Neil, and we're going to talk about marijuana cultivation. I don't know if I'm going to come up with a better title or not, but that's what we've got so far. Neil, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Big fan. Really happy to be a part of this show.
Heck yeah. Yeah, it's good to have you on.
Yeah.
Because you expressed interest forever ago, and then I lost my Google document, so I kind of
Oh,
lost
shit.
track of who wanted to come on the show, and so I'm glad you reached out again for my frantic, last minute, holy shit, I
Yeah.
need
Well, and I
more.
feel like this is going to be, at least hopefully, more of an interesting topic than anything I had going on back then.
The only thing I really know about it is what I've seen in Murder Mountain, which I don't know if you've seen that. Have you seen that documentary?
Yes, yes. My wife and I actually just watched that, just finished watching that a couple weeks ago. Yeah, kind of funny
Yeah.
that you mentioned that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, it's a little bit different than that, thankfully, at least how I do it, because we're doing it legally and it's indoors as opposed to outdoors. So right there, we're not having to deal with the threat of, robberies, armed thugs, anything like that. The cartels, I guess, are always a threat out there. And then we don't have to worry about the weather. People talk about the rain and that kind of thing, or drought or whatever it is. Wildfires have been pretty crazy in California the past couple of years, obviously. So indoors is a much easier controlled situation.
Yeah, I'm glad you've seen it. That's perfect timing then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, is there anything before we dive into it, anything you would like people to know about yourself?
Yeah. I've been growing, I guess, let's see, I want to say it was like late November of last year, so not a super long time. But when you're turning around a crop every 30 days, the experience piles up pretty quickly. I should say growing, commercially or industrially, I guess. It started back in high school, of course. Everyone, back then, of course, me being, a little bit of an old head, back then the bags would come with seeds in them. And of course, everybody had this idea of like, oh, well, we'll put it in the closet with a 65-watt incandescent bulb over it and we'll grow our own weed. And it's not that easy, and so that was sort of my first experience was growing in a closet. But this is a lot easier when you have the support and everything that the plants need. I'm originally from Florida, I guess. I've been in Montana now for this is my 11th year, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I went to school. I did all the college thing, got my college degree, tried going to grad school for like a semester and a half. And that took me to some office jobs and that kind of thing. And it turns out that doing those office jobs, I didn't like them as much as I like growing pot. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's sort of how I would describe myself as a pot farmer.
Well, you're more than just that, but
Well,
that's
yeah,
a
I
great
guess as far
story.
as career, in the United States, I think we have a tendency to define ourselves by our jobs, but yeah, so and I don't know, I'm doing it at home too. Like I've got a grow tent now in the garage, so it is something that has become a passion for me beyond just clocking in, growing some cannabis and coming home and forgetting about it. It's something I do now at home for fun.
So before you got into the commercial business, when you were telling that story of growing it in your closet, I had this vivid flashback to middle school and I won't name him, but this one kid's little brother had one, I'm pretty sure, growing in a shoe, like in his closet. But yeah, it was like the craziest shit we'd ever seen. Oh, it was so badass. But it was
Yeah.
like it was this teeny tiny little thing, just like barely sprouting. But anyways,
Yeah, and that's always what it was. It was like I'm gonna put it in a Pringles can, and I've got my closet, and I'm gonna put a bunch of foil in there, and but don't tell my mom. And it was always just some like weak, shitty looking plant that eventually died because, of course, we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have any idea how to feed these things, and this was like before really the internet kind of took off. And it's so easy now. You got these YouTube videos and you can just look it up. And
mhm.
yeah, it was a much different experience back then because of course it was illegal everywhere. So you really had to be careful. Like if you went to Home Depot or whatever and bought too many high pressure sodium lights, they'd call the cops on you. I don't want to
So
necessarily single them out. I mean, it could have been
okay,
me.
all right. I mean, all right.
If you went to the hardware store,
y- yes, the hardware store. So, what was your expectation of going commercial or growing commercially before?
yeah.
Sorry, huge brain fart. What was your expectation of growing commercially before you started?
Yeah, I kind of expected, I mean, I don't know, like I remember after I started, um, one of the guys was like, "Oh, everybody thinks it's just smoking pot and watching plants grow." And I didn't have that expectation. I knew it was going to be work. But I guess I was prepared to kind of sit there, put some headphones in, listen to a podcast or something or some music, trim some plants, sweep up, I don't know, go home, I guess. Like that was kind of my expectation. But yeah, that was, I guess, I was thinking it was gonna be kind of laid back, kind of individualized, I guess. Like you're gonna be working in this section, you're gonna be over here. I didn't really know what to expect, I guess. Yeah, I mean, because the guy that hired me, he was an outlaw grower in California for a decade. The guy I was working next to had no experience prior to getting hired on. So it was a real motley crew, I guess, so to speak. But I had no expectations beyond just kind of moving some dirt, moving some water around, working with plants, and then smoking a little bit of pot at the end of the day.
Would you be willing to walk us through kind of a typical day at
Yeah.
work?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess the typical day kind of depends on what day of the week. Because it is so industrialized, so mechanized essentially. Like there's a 30-day cycle basically that we kind of run on. Mondays and Fridays are very much the same. We're working with the plants that are in the flower stage, which is where the buds are starting to develop and they're getting ready for harvest. So with those, we'll come in first thing in the morning. We'll mix the food, and there's special, uh, fertilizer mixtures and that kind of thing, different nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are obviously the big three that you always see in fertilizer bags. But these, are liquid chemicals that have different things in there as well, magnesium and sulfur and other things that these plants need. And when they're in the flower stage, they need less nitrogen and whatever. So we mix up according to, okay, these are the flower stage plants. We'll mix up some water. We do that in like 55-gallon drums, and we'll go ahead and mix two at a time. We're running two flower rooms concurrently. So the first part of the day basically is everybody on a Monday or a Friday. You've got six guys, and we're hand watering the plants. We've got these big 55-gallon drums on wheels. We wheel them into one room, and we've got 100 and let's say 200 plants per room. And we just go and we check every plant, pick them up, see if the pot is heavy. If it is heavier, we don't give it as much water. If it's lighter, we give it a bunch of water. And we'll do those two rooms. Then, kind of depending on where we're at in the cycle, we'll generally stick with those flower rooms and we will trim them up, making sure that there's no dead leaves, that there's no spotty leaves. We're always checking the plants for like deficiencies, signs of those. If you see little brown spots, it means one thing. If you see dark green veins and light green leaves around those veins, that means something else. And luckily, we kind of have it dialed in. We don't see a lot of that. We had one crop back in December where we had a lot of powdery mildew on the plants, as well as some of the other plants were hermaphroditic, meaning that they had female and male like seeds and buds, which is bad. So, it's checking the plants, it's trimming them. We'll hang out and everybody kind of, shoots the shit and whatever. We'll lock in. We will focus on the plants for a little bit. Some guys will take a break. They'll go outside and smoke a joint. I don't necessarily do that at work because I find it slows me down too much. But then we'll kind of clean up and see what else needs doing, and we'll go home. Tuesdays and Saturdays, we're working on the vegetative cycle before they start flowering. And it's much the same. We're checking pots, we're watering them as needed, trimming them. We'll stake them out. Like we'll take the branches and kind of bend them down. We've got little bamboo stakes we stick in the dirt, tie them off. And that really, opens it up, gives some airflow, lets these different branches get some light, and it trains them to kind of help grow out rather than up. Because we're kind of, you're limited by space. You don't necessarily want to have plants touching the light. So if you can grow them out rather than up, that helps for sure. So that's kind of the typical days. Watering them in the mornings, plant care in the afternoons. The atypical days, I guess, would be the when we have the harvest. Thursday before harvest, we cut clones, which that's the thing. I don't know how much you know about like the whole process.
No, go as deep into it as you're willing to go.
Yeah. I'll talk about this all night, but basically with cutting clones, you take a plant that's in the vegetative stage, and if you let them go for a while, they can eventually get bigger. And that's sort of what you call your mom plant or your mother plant. And you can take cuttings off of those and, strip a little bit of the stem off and put it in a machine or, rock wool or just basically a medium to hold that cutting, and then the nutriated water, which allows the roots to grow from that. And then what you have there is an exact genetic clone of the plant that you cut it from. So when you have a plant that grows really well, grows very robustly, is resistant to various, pests and funguses and molds, you hang on to that one and you take those cuttings, because then those daughter plants, those clones, will have that exact same resistance to the various diseases. By the same token, if you get a mom that's weak and has susceptibility to that, it'll pass it on to the clones. So you don't want to do that. But we'll cut those clones. I think the most we've done in a day was something like 375. So that's a lot of plants. We've got, several different strains we work with, and we'll just start snipping clones off of those. And that'll take most of the day. The Friday, the next day after that, is the harvest day, and that's when you go into whatever flower room is ready for harvest, and you cut all those plants down, and you break the branches up, and you hang them in the drying room, and that'll be there for a week to dry. And then Saturday kind of starts the process all over again, because you've got the last crop of clones have now been planted. They've gone from a cloning machine, in our case, with a little aeroponic system, which sprays the nutriated water at the stems so those roots develop from them. We've put those in 1 gallon pots of soil, and then we've transferred those into 5 gallon pots. And so the Saturday after harvest, those 5 gallon pots will be moved into their new home in the flower room, where they will stay for the next 8 weeks before we cut them down.
Wow. In my head, I was like, so you like put them in the ground or in a greenhouse and you just kind of water them and maybe trim them, and like, oh my gosh, there's so much that goes into this.
There is, yeah. And so that's like, you're asking about expectations, and it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of what I thought, is like, okay, these are in the ground, or, in a pot of dirt as it is. And then it's kind of just hands off. No, it's not. It's very much hands on. You're working on these plants every day, and especially with us, like, we've got 600 and something plants generally going at any given time. And then for 2 weeks out of the year, out of the month, we've got another 150, 200 or so. So 700, 800 plants to look after. It keeps you busy, you know. Yeah, it keeps you busy. So yeah, that kind of defied expectations, and I guess the other expectation kind of defined was the pace. I wasn't expecting to be working as quickly as we do sometimes. I think a part of that was a function of the previous manager, the previous head grower. He was much more like, let's pick up the pace. But luckily, where we are now, we have a very good pace worked out.
Good.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things that you've learned since you've started growing commercially?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, yeah, just kind of talked about it there, I guess. Like, how the life cycle goes, like how everything is sort of, like I said, down to a day of the month. We know, okay, this is harvest, this is cutting clones, this is this day, this is what's going on. It's very regimented, which for me is kind of like, I don't know, you think about agriculture or something, it's just like, oh, you should grow this and harvest it when it's ready. And it's like, well, maybe it is, maybe it's not quite peak, maybe it's a little past the peak, maybe it's on the peak of like the best bud you can grow, but it's coming down in 8 weeks after you move it into that room, wherever it is. I've learned a lot. I've learned just how to care for a plant from essentially from seed to sale. So that's some knowledge that if people want, I am more than happy to share that. Get in contact with me. I'll help you set up your grow room and all that within the bounds of the law. Of course, I'm not going to help anybody break the law. But if somebody in any state where it's legal wants to grow some weed, I'll help you out. I've learned a lot for sure. Yeah. And go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Well, and just, now it's to the point where it's like, I don't know. It would be nice, I think, to kind of do this for myself. I think that's kind of where you get with some of these things, where it's like, I have the skill. The boss needs me. I don't need the boss. If I can find a way to do it for myself, I would really like to.
What are your favorite aspects of your job, whether it be growing in general or growing commercially?
I really like the crew that we have. So coming in and bullshitting with my friends is a really great aspect of that. It's cool to hang out with these guys. It's very relaxing to get in there to hang out. It's never too hot, never too cold, and to just get in there and kind of focus on the plant and look at what the plant needs. Where are you going to trim, where are you going to cut, what branches are you going to save, manipulating with these plants. I really like that aspect of it, is getting in there and, I don't want to say creating something, but guiding this plant along its life cycle is very cool. And, on kind of a less philosophical thing, after harvest, as we're trimming these plants up, some weed falls on the ground and you can't sell it. So it gets bagged up and somehow that winds up in my pocket and everybody gets a share. And my gosh, isn't that beautiful? A beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's like when we used to burn Subway cookies when we worked at Subway, so that way we couldn't sell them and we had to eat them. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want it to go to waste, because otherwise it just gets thrown away. And I'm not a big eater of Subway cookies or smoker of pot. So I find that actually it's kind of nice, because having all this, I mean, it's so much extra weed. Having so much of that is like, I can give it to people and make them happy, and it costs me nothing. And so making people happy for free is pretty great.
Now, what about things that you're not super stoked about or that you'd like to change?
Sure. Gosh, something I dislike would be the fact that, we're working as hard as we are, and it's for other people, it's for the owners, and that's the nature of capitalism, obviously, is that, the people with the capital, they control the means of production, and we just have to go to work for them. And I mean, we're bust and hump every day, and we're fighting one thing, whether the room is too hot, because obviously it's summertime now. We got to work on the AC to get those cranking. whatever it may be, we're working hard. And it just sort of seems like for the owners, obviously they're just sort of sitting back and, they show up and they're driving a Mercedes or they're driving a Cadillac or something. We got guys with a shitty old Chevrolet where the crankshaft is going. And it's like, well, wait a minute. These guys we're putting in the work. I guess my big beef is capitalism.
Yeah. Are you working 6 days a week?
I'm working 5 days a week, 4 days a
5
week.
days
No,
a
I'm working
week.
4 days a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are the wages like?
I think for what we're getting paid is pretty good for the state. Just some things have gone on. I don't know. I don't know if we want to get into this. Did I mention that they're going to close the grow when I spoke to you about this?
Yeah, you before we recorded, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's something, and it's not anything to do with like the profitability or our job performance. I mean, we're fucking killing it. Like we've seen the test results. But they are going to close the grow in my city and move it to their headquarters city. And so the wages, after talking to some other, dispensaries and other cultivations in town, this one guy was like, oh, we'll pay you $14 an hour part-time. I was like, dude, I'm making way more than that. I'm making 17 an hour right now. Like that's not comparable. So yeah, I mean, $17 an hour, 4 days a week. It's tight, it's tough, but I'm very fortunate that, I have a partner in my wife, and she has a terrific job that covers a lot of the stuff that you need, like health insurance and all that. So I'm very fortunate in that aspect, but it can be, I think, a very exploitative industry as a whole, because people don't get paid time off. We don't get sick days per se.
I'm guessing you
So
don't get health insurance.
no, there's no health insurance offered through the job either. No, for sure. And it's one of those things too, where it's like, oh, if you get hurt on the job, you can get a workers' comp claim, but you got to pass a drug test to get it, which I think right now I'd be the only person able to do that because I haven't smoked in like 6 weeks. So yeah, I mean, it's tough, a lot of that is the fact that like everybody wants to be in this industry because everybody thinks it's just smoking pot and watching plants grow. They don't necessarily realize that it's farm work. It's farm labor. It's hard work. You're moving 50-pound bags of dirt on your back, essentially, by your own carrying capacity.
Well, that sort of answers my next question, which was, do you have any advice for people who want to start going into this industry? I'm specifically thinking of like new growers or new like cultivators.
Oof, yeah. So I can really only speak for Montana because that's where I live and that's my experience of it. I've had people ask me, it's like, oh, dude, I want to come grow with you, or, how do I do this, whatever. And it's like, okay, the number one thing you have to do in Montana is get your worker's permit card. It costs, I don't know, the total cost is like under $100. You can go online right now as you're listening to this, go onto the Montana Cannabis Control Division website, take a couple of tests, watch some crappy videos about human trafficking and IDing people, and you fill out the paperwork and you can get your card in the mail in like 3 days. It's not hard to do, and yet for some reason so many people don't want to do it. It's a requirement to work in the industry in Montana. Just go do it. Right? Yeah. If you want to do it, because you walk into a dispensary and you'll see the signs, immediate openings if you have your card. Like you can go into a store, get hired today. I can point you out to the stores where they are. If you have your card, you can start working this afternoon. And so that's I guess my advice. I guess my other advice would be like temper your expectations, because it is still a business at the end of the day. It's not something that people just sit around and smoke weed all day at. There has to be a hard work element to it, whether you're cultivating or selling it in the dispensary. There's going to be work. Don't take any shit. That's the other advice I would give. Like, people think that because it's not federally legal, I don't know how involved like the Labor Bureau gets in the United States, but your state still looks out for you. Sometimes the Division of Labor and Industry in Montana. And, whether they do or don't, you still have rights as a worker. So fucking organize and don't take any shit and let the bosses know that, they need you, you don't need them. As far as starting a cultivation, starting a dispensary, gosh, that's super difficult. I don't know, how is it in Oregon? Do you know how it is out there?
Not really. I'm not that familiar.
Okay. Because, like, right now, I mean, this is something that we're all trying to watch very carefully. And in fact, like I said, there's some guys that are talking about opening their own dispensary, opening their own cultivation. And so it was supposed to be, we have a moratorium in Montana where July 1st, 2025, the moratorium was supposed to be lifted, meaning that if you had the money to apply for a license, and all the paperwork and everything else that goes along with that, the state of Montana theoretically was going to be opening new cultivation, new dispensary licenses. There's a bit of proposed legislation working its way through right now, where, if you're not familiar with Montana, the legislature meets every other year. So we don't always have a legislature that's in session. So, there's basically 4 months every other year that the legislature meets, and that's when all these laws come together. And they want to make it now where they're gonna extend that moratorium for another 2 years. So basically, you have to buy a license from somebody, whether that's to cultivate or sell in a dispensary. You have to buy that license, and it's so tough to find land where you're able to do that. Like in my county, there's all these different zoning restrictions. In the city, there's other zoning restrictions. It's so fucking tough. And I've been thinking about this, since you sent me kind of the little interview prep questions. Other things to say is, like, if you're interested in doing this, I would say get active and get involved as much as you can, because the legislature in Montana's only had legal recreational sales now for like 2.5 years. And that's not because the legislators woke up 3 years ago and said, "Oh my God, the war on drugs is this horrible, misguided policy. We've done so much damage." They didn't wake up and have a sudden realization. The citizens got together and passed a ballot initiative that forced the legislature to legalize adult recreational sales. They have no desire to do this beyond being forced to do it. So get involved, I would say, and work to make those changes in the legislature and in your local business, because the local county commissioners, the city commissioners, they don't want it either. We watched this legislation go through where they're talking about extending the moratorium, and everyone at work, we're sitting around outside and they're like, "Oh gosh, what they should do is this, and they should do this, and they should do that." And I stopped and I said, "Guys, the reason they're not doing that is because they don't want this industry to succeed, right? At least in Montana. Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington, maybe a little bit better. California's got their own issues with like taxation and that kind of thing. But Montana and other states and other jurisdictions, it seems like they don't want it to succeed. So if you're going to start, be ready for a fight, I guess."
That's great. Neil, you were worried
Talking
about
a
being
lot.
interesting this episode. That's the point. No, that's fantastic. It's like, I feel like the less I talk in an episode, the better it is. So
Maybe, I don't know. I just hope I'm entertaining for people. I'm
No,
very
that was
passionate
great.
about this, obviously. Like, it drives me fucking nuts that, like, it's just a plant, you guys. Like, 50 years of the war on drugs under Nixon, and like 100 years with like reefer madness of, racist demonization of this plant, have really done a number on the psyche of this country and the people in it. In a past life, in a past job that I had, I would go to these meetings where people would be talking about like substance abuse issues in my city. And it's fine. Like they're doing good work for the most part, because they're like trying to, do like prescription drug drop off and all this other stuff. But then they were focused on like the dispensaries, and it's like, oh, cannabis is so bad because of this, that, and the other, impaired driving and blah 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 blah. And it's like, okay, but every argument you can make against this is another argument you can make for alcohol, and they don't carry that same energy for the bars and casinos, which obviously is hypocritical, But it's so frustrating, just fighting this uphill battle, I guess, and trying to figure out if I can even open my own cultivation or anything like that, has really opened my eyes to just how tough it is, you know. And they're happy to take your money. I mean, the state of Montana, I think, takes like 30% or 20% or something like that, off the retail price. That's not even including the 20% tax they add that the consumer pays. The consumer at the dispensary pays an extra 20% to the state, and then the dispensary has to pay their income taxes. And so the state is happy to get your money. The federal government, you got to file and pay taxes on your income there, even though it's federally illegal and they know what you're doing. They're happy to take your money, but they'll fight you every step of the way.
It's so shitty.
It is. It really is. So I don't know. I get fired up about it, because I think, like, with the legislature, and the moratorium, they're talking about how if you have a dispensary or a cultivation right now, you have to get relicensed. You have to reapply for your license every year in the state. And that, to make sure that you're not suddenly breaking the law, that you're not breaking fire code or anything like that. So that's great that they do that. The problem is, I've heard there's like 2 inspectors in the entire state of Montana. Montana's a big fucking state. Even with only half the counties allowing recreational sales, it's a lot of ground to cover. There's a lot of dispensaries and a lot of cultivations to cover. So my fear is, these people, like, in the industry supports this moratorium being extended because they say to the state, I really hope that in 2 years' time, you'll hire more agents, you'll do more inspections, you'll get these licenses. Right now, the license backlog is like 6 months. So if your license expires, you got to get that renewal paperwork in. It takes them 6 months apparently to get that inspection and recertify. And by that time, you've got to start the process all over again because it's going to be another 6-month wait. And again, I haven't been following every piece of legislation, so it's possible, give the state the benefit of the doubt, that there is going to be more funding to hire more agents and train them and get them out there to reduce this backlog. But if there's not, man, the state is just playing you guys. The state is playing the industry. Because if there's no commitment to that, again, if the state wanted to fix it, they would, and I don't think they do. So I don't expect them to fund the enforcement that they need. I think they're happy with a 6-month backlog. I think they're happy making it as difficult as possible.
I think you covered everything pretty well. Is there anything else you wanted to cover, or
Oh,
any
shit. I don't know.
thoughts? Any closing thoughts?
Really wanted to hit on, like, the legislative aspect of it, because, like, obviously getting involved, especially locally, and just, I mean, you don't even have to get involved, I guess, but just pay attention to what they're doing. That would sort of be my big call to action, I guess. The fact that, yeah, like, these people are going to the county commissioner meetings and proposing limiting the number of dispensaries in the county to a number that is less than what we currently have. I don't know how that would work, but are they going to start closing dispensaries? Are they going to put people out of jobs? So get involved if you want to see. I mean, the whole history of this plant of the 20th century in the United States is political. So I think if you are going to your dispensary and picking up an eighth or whatever and going home and smoking, man, you got to think about everybody that came before you to make that possible. The folks that went to jail, that hid from the law, that grew underground, that put magnets on their fucking electrical meters to slow the rate down so the electric company didn't notice a spike in electric usage, running fucking insulation in the attic to keep the heat signature down from the DEA using thermal cameras. Like, think about all the shit that went into that. And, I think you kind of owe it to the plant. Like, don't take it for granted. You owe it to the plant. You owe it to yourself if you're enjoying it recreationally to pay attention like that. And if you're in a state where it's not legal for adult sales recreationally, get involved in that. If you want it, you got to go get it because they're not going to give it to you. Don't wait for the fucking federal government to legalize it across the country because you're going to be waiting a long fucking time. So get involved, do use that states' rights argument for good, you know, states' rights for something decent. Yeah, because that was a cool thing for me, going to the dispensary and picking up an eighth of what I and my friends grew, what we grew together, knowing that, I mean, literally my sweat is in that, in a molecular way, because I dropped a bead of sweat into the fertilizer water, poured that into the plant. Like, we're all in that, and our care. And I stiffed myself with the scissors, and a little bit of blood maybe got into the soil. And so that's so much hard work goes into that. And seeing that eighth for sale, and taking that home and looking at it and knowing that this came from our hard work and the hard work of everybody that came before us, as far as fighting for legislation and collecting signatures, and proving that it's not some demon weed. Yeah, I was sitting in my living room, I was crying because of just what that meant to me. So I don't know, temper your expectations, I guess. If it means that much to you, like, get involved. If it doesn't mean that much to you, I don't know, man, keep smoking, be good, be happy. But yeah, that's about all I got, I guess.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you,
Thank you.
Neil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yay.
Aw.
Oh. Yeah, so if people you mentioned get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that? Yeah,
Yeah,
there we
shoot me a
go.
message on
Good idea.
Instagram. Yeah, like I said, I'm not doing anything to break the law. If you message me and you're in Idaho, I'm gonna tell you to get fucked. But you know, if it's legalization is coming in Idaho, yeah, I'll help you out for sure there.
Doubtful.
No,
Uh,
yeah, for sure. Like, Idaho is going to be like, I think their legislature, speaking of legislatures, I think just passed a resolution that was like, we will never legalize recreational cannabis.
Neil, thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming on the show. I really
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah, this is a blast. I don't know. Yeah, we'll figure out something else I can monologue on for 45 minutes.
Hell yeah. Thank you, Neil. You're amazing, and it was so good to talk to you again. Thank you also, listener, for listening to the show. If you want to support me and the podcast, you can do so by downloading episodes as they come out, subscribing, giving the show a rating, and sharing it whenever there's an episode that speaks to you or you think it would speak to somebody you know. If you'd like to suggest a topic or come on the show, you can email me at kilizabeth.pod@gmail.com. That's KILLIZABETH.POD @gmail.com. And if I don't respond, it's okay. You can send me another email. I probably just forgot to respond or thought I responded but actually didn't. Or my phone didn't send the email because sometimes my phone doesn't like to send emails. All sorts of different things. I don't bite. Worst thing is that I accidentally ghost you. But like I said, you can send me another message. I want to hear what you want to hear. So thanks again, and I'll see you next month.